$500 for a 20-minute Uber ride. Yes, that actually happened to thousands of people. During Hurricane Sandy, rides across Manhattan went from around $20 to hundreds of dollars. And people paid. So what changes? What happens in your head when a price like that suddenly makes sense, even in a less extreme context than a hurricane? Let's find out. So most people assume that surge pricing is simple. Demand spikes, Uber raises prices, Uber makes more money. That's true, but it's only half of the mechanism. Uber's algorithm monitors supply and demand in real time. Every minute, across every zone in every city, when a demand spikes, a stadium empties, a storm hits, a New Year's Eve reaches midnight, and there aren't enough drivers nearby, the multiplier activates. The standard explanation stops here. But here's what's usually left out. The price increase is also a recruitment tool. A driver who was about to log off for the evening gets a notification. Surge pricing active in your area. 2.4 times. Many of them stay or drive towards the surge zone. So the algorithm does two things at once. On the passenger side, it reduces some demand. People who aren't in a rush decide to wait, to take the bus, or to walk. And on the driver's side, it brings more supply online. The gap between the two closes, the multiplier drops, and the market slowly finds balance. Uber published data on this exact dynamic after the Super Bowl. During post-game surge periods, active driver hours in the area increased substantially. Rides happened that otherwise wouldn't have. But it's not a perfect system. In extreme situations, natural disasters, real emergencies, it has caused genuine harm, which is why Uber now caps prices during declared crisis. But in the everyday version, the rainstorm, the sold-out concert, the mechanism I just explained is more sophisticated than pure opportunism. And the takeaway for your business is that surge pricing is a dual-sided tool. The surge increase is simultaneously a demand filter and a driver incentive, which generates money in the process. Understanding that changes the conversation from, is this fair, to what is it actually doing? So the algorithm makes sense economically. But what I find more interesting is the psychology of why passengers accept it. Because if you showed someone a $500 invoice for a 20-minute ride in a normal condition, they'd refuse. And yet, during some major disruptions, people paid exactly that. The reason comes down to something Daniel Kahneman spent decades documenting. We don't evaluate value in absolute terms. We evaluate it relative to a reference point. In normal conditions, your reference point for an Uber is what you usually pay. $15, $20, whatever the baseline is. And anything above that feels expensive because you're comparing the new price to a familiar number. But the moment a surge kicks in, the relevant reference point shifts. Standing outside a stadium at midnight, 20,000 people trying to get home without any better alternative than Uber, the question in your head is no longer, is this worth $80? The question becomes, compared to what I'm looking at right now, is $80 worth it? And that's a completely different calculation. Uber's app is designed to facilitate exactly that version of it, that problem that you are trying to solve. The interface doesn't remind you of the standard price. It shows you a car moving towards you, an estimated arrival time, a map. The experience is about getting home, not about the price per kilometer. This is what behavioral economists call reference dependence. Your willingness to pay is not a fixed number. It's anchored to whatever comparison feels most relevant at the moment of the decision. And in that moment outside the stadium, the relevant comparison is the 2-hour walk home. Against that alternative, $80 feels reasonable. We don't evaluate prices in isolation. We evaluate them against whatever alternative is most present in our mind at the time. Now let's talk about the cases that made headlines. During major disruptions, the Hurricane Sandy or the Sydney hostage crisis, Uber was charging prices that reached hundreds of dollars for short rides. The backlash was significant. Politicians got involved. Uber eventually introduced hard price caps during declared emergencies. and I'm really glad they did. There's a meaningful distinction between surge pricing during ordinary disruption, a rainstorm, a concert ending late, and pricing during a crisis where people have limited alternatives and genuine danger is involved. But here's what those extreme cases reveal beyond the controversy. Price is never a universal number. It's always a function of the situation the buyer is when they decide. In my pricing work, after more than 20 years, one of the ideas I like to return to is this. What is the decision actually costing your customers? Not in money, but in the alternatives they are giving up. When the alternative is genuinely worse in a way customers can feel, like walking home for 2 hours under the rain at 1 a.m., willingness to pay moves dramatically upwards. At $500, the question is not whether a 20-minute ride is worth $500 in some objective sense. The question is whether getting home safely tonight in that specific situation matters enough to that specific person. And for some people, the answer is yes, which, when you think about it, is entirely rational. So price is never only what a product costs. It's also what the alternative costs the buyer. So what does any of this mean outside of ride-hailing? Dynamic pricing exists in more industries than most people realize. Airlines have used it for decades, hotels, electricity grids in some countries, concert tickets, we'll talk about that next week, and increasingly the tools to implement some version of it are becoming more accessible to smaller businesses. Whether you're running a business or a customer, I'll let you decide if that's good news. But before anyone moves in that direction, there are two conditions worth examining honestly. First, your customers need to genuinely need what you're offering in that moment. The need has to be real, and the alternatives have to feel concretely worse. Without that, raising prices during a peak period tends to push people away rather than get them to pay. Second, your customers need to be able to make sense of why the price is what it is. Uber survives surge pricing in part because the app explains it. The wording is rarely elegant and nobody's particularly happy about it, but there's a message attached. Prices are higher due to increased demand in your area. There's a logic connected to the number. When prices change without any visible reason, when a customer just notices the price is different from last time with no explanation offered, you don't get acceptance. You get confusion or resentment or both. The businesses that manage variable or dynamic pricing well are the ones where customers can, in some part of their thinking, connect the price to something real, even if they prefer that the price were lower. So the takeaway for your business, if you're considering any kind of variable pricing, transparency about the mechanism isn't optional. Your customer doesn't need to love it, but they need to understand it. That understanding, however grudging, is often the difference between payment and walk away. So now that we've seen the mechanics of surge pricing, we are ready for next week's topic: how the same logic applies to dynamic pricing ticketing. Why concert tickets for Taylor Swift can be more expensive than a flight ticket, thousands of dollars, and why that's not irrational. In any case, it's going to be an expensive love story. If this kind of analysis is useful to you, whether you're building a pricing strategy or just trying to understand the world around you, subscribe to the Pricing Club. New video every Thursday. Thank you for watching. Take care.